Hello there, and welcome to the show. The show is brought to you by Connversa, a podcasting agency that helps B2B brands start podcasts to connect with prospects, generate content, and grow brand awareness. I'm Jeremy Shere, and my guest is Ashley McAlpin. Ashley is head of marketing at Rockerbox, which is a marketing attribution platform for data driven B2C marketers. Ashley, welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So let's dive right into our topic, which is building out a marketing function designed to drive revenue.
Yes,
Now, I mean, ultimately, one way or another, all marketing is meant to drive revenue,
100%. Yeah.
right? At the end of the day. Um, but what is it? So then when we talk about revenue marketing, specifically, what are we talking about? Like, how is revenue marketing different than any other kind of marketing?
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting way to ask the question. So I think what I would say is I would turn it around and say rather than how is revenue marketing different from, other types of marketing or content marketing or whatever, I'd ask what role does marketing like what role does content marketing or field marketing or partner marketing, what does that play in a revenue focused marketing engine? Because I think they're different, right? Revenue marketing
Okay.
isn't this like new subset of a type of marketing. It is marketing. So, what we're doing is we're building a holistic approach to marketing with a core objective or focus on revenue above everything else. So, I think a lot of types of marketing, to your point, focus indirectly on revenue, right? Like they should. If they're not, then I think we have to like take two steps back and like really talk about what's the purpose of marketing. Um, but my goal with building a revenue focused marketing engine is to align our content, our field, our digital, our operational marketing all back to the same core focus, which is to build more revenue. And I think that what happens when you don't do that is that you create these marketing silos that feel really disconnected from the true business objective, which ultimately every business objective is to drive more revenue, right? Like if there's a business who their objective is not drive more revenue or like raise more money for something, then I feel like there's probably a problem there too. So I think
Mhm.
from, you guys talk a lot about content marketing, you talk a lot to content marketers. I think from a content marketing perspective, that means that we look at everything through this lens of how does this ultimately drive more revenue?
Okay. And that's as opposed to through a lens of, I don't know what, like growing brand awareness
Engagement.
or
Yeah, I think
okay.
that, like, the difference is it's really this, like, shift in mentality and, like, unlearning is the way that I look at it, because I
Mhm.
talk to a lot of marketers in my day-to-day. I talk to a lot of B2C marketers, but I also engage with a lot of other B2B marketers, in different communities that I'm in and things like that, and I think there's this, like, common trend where marketers are just now starting to at least talk about their role in revenue. And I think you hear a lot like marketers don't have a seat at the table, or like marketers aren't they're
Mhm.
they're not part of the driving engine, right? Like they usually kind of defer to sales who drives revenue. Well, from my perspective, marketing should be driving revenue. And if we're not looking at revenue as our source of kind of quality assurance with everything else that we're doing, then we're doing this incorrectly. I think that one example of that is that we might be looking at, content marketing and saying like we would just want to drive more like top level engagement. We just want to build the top of funnel, right? This like funnel mentality that we've been talking about for the last 15 years and everybody is so obsessed with. Well, there's some like real big problems with just always looking at the funnel. Specifically, if you're going to say marketing, you're responsible for the top of funnel and that's it. Like that's what I am gold on, like that is what I am comped on, like that's what I'm bonus on, whatever, then there is no reason for me to actually care whether or not that top of funnel makes it to the bottom of the funnel, which is where the business impact
Mm.
is, right? And I think that there are like pieces of good in there. There's a reason that that's been a trend. Like there's a reason that marketing tends to focus on top of funnel. But what I'm saying is that when I step into an organization and I'm talking about how we should approach marketing from a revenue perspective, I want to look at the entire funnel and I want to say, I don't really care how many people are in the top. I want to increase the number that come out of the bottom. And ultimately that's what I
Mm.
see my role as a data-driven revenue focused marketer.
Okay. We're going to dig into all of this stuff. I mean, do you think that one reason why there's been so much focus on the top of the funnel from, a content marketer's perspective is just because it's so darn hard to show how, how content marketing actually does drive revenue. Even if you wanted to, like, even if
Yeah,
that's your goal, like, how do you draw the line from a piece of content to revenue growth, right? It's just really,
yeah,
really, really hard to do. It's a lot
yeah.
easier to show like, well, we got people in the funnel.
Mhm.
That's now take it away, sales or whatever. Like, do you think that's
Yeah.
what's driving that, that whole approach that you described?
100%. I think that attribution is really difficult. And I also think that in some earlier stage B2B startups, attribution should not be the primary focus, right? So then to your point, like, how do you know? Like, how do you draw content back to revenue? And I think the way that I think of it is, I mentioned unlearning earlier. I think that it's just this shift in our mentality where it doesn't actually change the core objectives of what we're doing. It just changes the way that we think about them. So if we start thinking about, well, let's use content marketing as an example. We start thinking about content marketing through this revenue marketing lens. We start thinking like, okay, I need to look at all of my content in the buyer stage journey, right? Like I'm not just creating content that I think might be relevant to my target audience. I have sat down, I have developed brand messaging that I know resonates with my audience because I've done market research, I've talked to prospects, I've talked to customers, and now I'm going to create content that specifically is purpose to nurture them through each stage of their buying journey. So I'm going to create content for awareness. So we'll use Rockerbox as an example. We do marketing attribution for B2C brands, right? So I might do a what is attribution, and that is going to kind of satisfy that awareness stage. But at the same time, I'm also going to be producing content at the decision making stage, and really pushing into some of those like data driven case study type forms of content. And how do we
Mm,
actually level those back to revenue? I'm saying that we should look at revenue. I'm not necessarily saying that you have to be able to say like, oh, that what is attribution ebook drove X
mhm,
percent of revenue this month. I'm saying that like instead of focusing on the top level, like, oh, the attribution ebook drove 17 leads. So that's, good job. We drove 17 leads. I want to know, did those 17 leads actually turn into anything else? Did they turn into qualified opportunities? Are they looking like they're going to close? Were they the right type of 17 people? Because if they weren't, then I didn't meet my goal of producing content at the awareness stage. I just produced a piece of content that I thought would be good, and it wasn't, right? Even if 17 people downloaded it, like that's not actually good if those are the wrong 17 people. And, on the same note, 100 people could have downloaded it, but if only one
mm,
of those was the right person, then I didn't do that right, right? So I'm saying we shift
mhm,
our mentality around marketing and marketing success and the way that we're quantifying marketing success away from these like top level, really superficial metrics and into
mhm,
this revenue focus where marketing teams are intimately aware of the way that they are impacting revenue, and everything that we're doing should be supporting that journey in some way or another. And so that might seem like, it might seem rudimentary, right? Like we're not like this is just the basics of marketing. We're not changing anything. The core concepts of content marketing are not changing, but the way that we're evaluating and looking at the role of content marketing as part of the larger revenue engine, that's what we're changing.
okay. So can you give me an example of how you do this? Like, can you point me to a piece of content you guys have created that was designed specifically with through this revenue focus,
Mhm.
and what it is, how you created it, how you measure it, all that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think in terms of like one specific, like this goes back to like what I said before. We want to look at all of the buying stages and create content that supports those stages. And so there's not like this magic, like create this one piece of content
Yeah.
and all of a sudden like you're a revenue focused marketer. That doesn't like that doesn't even exist, right? At Rockerbox, like I said, the creating the what is attribution, we did that, and it drives that top of funnel, but that's not what I'm looking at. I couldn't tell you how many leads came through it, not because we're not tracking it. we are. But as like the executive marketing leader, that's not the number I'm most interested in, right? I expect my content marketing manager to be looking at that number and to be aware of the impact that that's having. But I'm more interested in how many qualified opportunities have come from that and where those opportunities are in the pipeline to close. And at the same time, we're also, like I said, building that decision level content that's like maybe comparing business level use cases to meet the buyers at the later stages of the buying journey. So I think that
Mhm.
there's like, it's not as much about like a specific example of content because we're creating all types of content. You know, we do webinars, we
Yeah.
do ebooks, we do a lot of thought leadership on the blog, we do a lot of third party content where we're offering our thought leadership on different platforms like newsletters and podcasts and things like that. But what I am looking at is kind of taking a step back and saying revenue focused marketing is drawing everything back to one end goal, and that is revenue, versus marketing being so focused, like hyper focused on vanity metrics, which I think is something a lot of
Yeah.
times, especially content marketing, falls into, right? Because there, to your point, there's not always an easy path to the revenue. So how do you know? And my answer is that's all we're looking at. And so if we're only looking at revenue, we can see how our content has influenced that revenue by looking at the engagement. I mean, if you use tools like HubSpot or
Mhm.
Pardot or Marketo, you can see how have these people who came through the other end, right? Who were closed won, who made it through the end of the funnel, like what did they engage with along their path and what can you learn from that? And then I
Mm.
think doing things like making sure that you're doing customer surveys and prospect surveys and really learning more about your target audience so that you're aware of like the types of content they're looking for in those buyer
Mhm.
stages versus what I've seen some content marketing teams do that's interesting but I think misses the point a little bit is they find these like niche bubbles of topics that their broad target market might be interested in and they just like produce a lot of content on this like what is this, what is that, what is this, what is that, and they end up with a lot of content and they might get good engagement but they're not actually moving those people through the funnel with this focus on getting them to the revenue. And so it's kind of like unlearning unlearning the way that we've been thinking about content marketing and actually starting to build a bridge with that content
Mhm.
marketing versus just looking at content marketing as a pool. Like it's not a pool, it's a bridge, right? We don't just want one
Yeah.
bucket.
Uh-huh. Okay, so kind of breaking through that silo, I think you used that term earlier to
Yeah, yeah,
so
exactly.
if I'm hearing you correctly, and I just want to make sure I understand
Yeah,
that it's not so much about radically changing the kind of content you're producing necessarily, right? It's
right.
more about changing your like your focus, your awareness. Maybe that
Yeah,
means
it's
focusing
changing
on a different set of KPIs or
exactly.
just as you said, I think you used the word awareness a couple of times, being
Mhm.
aware of sort of not being satisfied or shutting off when you say, well, the ebook got 100 downloads and we got 100, emails from it. Job well done, everyone. Move on
Yeah,
to the next thing. I think you're saying, no, that's just the beginning. Let's follow those people. How many of
yeah,
them actually got out the other side of the funnel and became customers, right? That's
exactly.
part of what marketing should be focusing on, not just sales.
Yeah, and it's like it's our responsibility as marketers to challenge our success, right? And so I think it's
Mhm.
easy for marketers to sit and like look at those top line metrics and say, "Hey, this was really successful, not our problem." And what I'm saying is that it's time for marketing to take accountability for what comes out the other
Mhm.
end because ultimately we do have a lot of influence over whether or not people make it all the way through the sales cycle. And so I think it's less about changing the tactical execution and more about changing the way that you're strategically thinking about the role of marketing within your
Yeah.
organization and specifically
Mhm.
the role of content marketing, right? If I'm a content marketing leader, I want to be in my role, I want to be able to say I am positively influencing revenue and here's how I move beyond these top level metrics that everybody else is looking at. And I think the more content marketers start to take that mentality and take that approach to the table, the more they're going to be able to build success in their own right,
Yeah.
because not a lot of people are doing that, right? Like, when's the last time most sales leaders had a content marketer come to them and say, hey, you know what? I know that I shot 100 leads through that ebook. I recognize that, only 10% of them were quality. Here's what we're doing to make sure that the next ebook only hits that 10% that are quality so that we can increase that percentage to 100% so that we can get more people through the end of the funnel. Like, when's the last time that somebody heard that? I mean, I've not run into it that many times in my career. And I
Hmm.
think the more we like change our mentality on what we as marketers consider successful,
Yeah.
not only the better are we going to be at our craft, right? But the more valuable we come to the organization. Because if marketers can position themselves like they already are a key piece of the revenue engine, but they're often looked at as a secondary piece, right? And so I think the more that marketers can position themselves as that driving revenue force, the more say they're going to have ultimately in the success of the organization.
Yeah, God, that's really interesting. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially given that it seems like more organizations are kind of doubling down on content, right? The
Yes,
Content
right.
Marketing Institute put out a report not that long
Mhm.
ago, showed that some high percentage of the companies they surveyed said we're going to do even more content. It's becoming a bigger part of what we do marketing wise.
Especially in an
So,
economic downturn, right? Like especially now.
yeah. So it
Yeah,
just makes all the more sense that the more emphasis you put on content, the more you're going to want to have a way to get ROI from it, or to measure it, or to
exactly.
so. And I like what you said about, yeah, going to sales and saying, hey, we got here's what we're going to do in the next iteration of this to really focus on the leads that actually converted or were the right leads. Or maybe even better yet, or also go to sales and say, what do you think? Let's
Yeah,
collaborate. What should we be
exactly.
doing with this ebook to focus it better, right? Like
Mhm.
true collaboration. Yeah,
Yeah,
indeed.
absolutely.
All right, Ashley, well, you really gave us some great insights there, packed a lot of stuff in, and I just have one final question, which is, how can people best connect with you?
Oh, that is a great question. They can find me on LinkedIn. I will send you over the link, but it's Ashley McAlpin. And yeah, I'd love to connect. I'd love to hear from other marketers on what you're doing, how you're looking at content marketing. I think it's a really great conversation, and the role of marketing in revenue is something that we're not talking about enough. And I think it might be because we're scared of it. We're scared to talk
Mm,
about marketing and revenue because it adds a little bit more pressure, but honestly, that pressure is there anyways. So the more we acknowledge it and push into it, the better we're going to be. So, yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
okay, awesome. Well, Ashley, thank you so much. That was some really great, insightful stuff. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.